Today's video is brought to you by Storyblocks. A medium format version of the X100 sounds like one of those simple and excellent ideas. Feels like it can only be better. But I've traveled on 2 trips with this camera and I am 100% certain that this is not a camera for everyone. Not because it's bad, and not even because of its price, but just because it's a very different camera from what you'd expect as a supersized X100VI. It's the first idea you get when you lay eyes on the GFX100RF. Just one glance and it's unmistakable that this camera has its design based off the X100 series of cameras. Fuji does have a thing for making cameras appear to look very similar, but are actually very different in reality. Some of these differences from the X100VI are more obvious than others. There's of course the glaring omission of an optical viewfinder on the GFX100RF. The model name itself is already enough to raise a few eyebrows because at least just prior to launch, no word from Fuji as to what RF actually stands for, but we've all got a pretty good hunch it might be rangefinder. Of course, this technically isn't a rangefinder camera, it's more of a rangefinder style, but not having an OVF at all does minus a few style points. Those style points are refunded, however, in the form of accessories, because generously in the box, this GFX ships with a hood and a clear filter. There is also a shoulder strap, which is similar to the one that comes with the limited edition X100VI, except this one doesn't have grey stripes on it. While the hood and filter do thicken up the camera's footprint by quite a bit, it does mean the lens is very well protected, even if you travel it uncapped. It's got a tilt-up only 3.15-inch display, and this has a 3:2 aspect ratio, so it's slightly wider than the native sensor ratio, so it fits some of the UI along the edges. It's got a nice and inconspicuous leaf shutter, but there is no built-in flash on this camera, which I presume is devastating news to some Gen Z photographers. That, along with the lack of an OVF, does leave the front top plate looking a bit empty now, especially when compared against an X100. The width of it is actually impressively only a touch wider than an X100VI, but it is fairly taller, which makes it quite squarish and a bit like an Instax. Imagine having your GFX mistaken for an Instax. Something not very obvious about the top plate though is it's now made from machined aluminium instead of being pressed. This also applies to the lens ring, dials, and the bottom plate as well. There is a beautiful, flush metal AF selector on the backplate, and it's a million times more graceful than the plastic switch on the side of the X100s. For the first time on any Fuji, there is also an aspect ratio dial on the rear now, although it does manifest itself as a bit of an eyesore in my opinion. I would personally take a film simulation dial over this any day. The front dial is humongous, but for some reason cannot be pressed to be a toggle. Below that is a lever for the digital teleconverter, and I keep calling it a zoom rocker. And fortunately, we've got dual UHS 2 card slots on the side and a single W235 battery powering this camera for ages. It's the same 102 megapixel sensor from the GFX100S2, but at face value, the 100RF will sound like an underwhelming camera. You see, there is no IBIS, and the lens is a 35mm f4, which is around 28mm in full frame equivalent. It's a combination which made me think that this camera made no sense, and the more I used it, the more that felt to be the case. Until I was finally open to the idea of cropping my frame. Which is a bit ironic if you paid for a medium format sensor, but the first set of revelations came when I traveled to the beautiful city of Bangkok with the GFX100RF.
I don't actually have a drone with me here in Bangkok, so all that aerial footage you just saw, I was able to get them from Storyblocks.
It comes in super handy exactly for times like these, so I can use a shot of B-roll I otherwise would not have been able to capture myself. It's one of those rare things which saves you effort but also adds production value. Many of the animations I've been using recently are motion templates I got also from Storyblocks. That even includes the social handle animation that's been at the end of all my videos since 2020. There is an official plugin for Adobe Creative Cloud which lets you access the entire Storyblocks Storyblocks stock library from within Premiere Pro and After Effects, saving you even more time. And I mean it when I say each asset I use from Storyblocks saves me hours of work. Best part is, the downloads you get are unlimited with a monthly or annual subscription, and this is from a library of over 1 million 4K or HD clips, thousands of motion templates, but it also includes music, sound effects, and images, all for just one subscription. Anything you download from Storyblocks is 100% royalty-free, licenses are granted in perpetuity, meaning they never expire, and they'll even whitelist your YouTube channel to reduce the likelihood of claims. To get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head to storyblocks.com/ZYProductions or click the link in description. Back on the busy streets of Bangkok, all I could think of while holding this camera was I am stuck with a 35mm f4. It's a bit wide and quite hard to single details out with this. Also, I was hellbent on making full use of the medium format sensor because I felt it defeats the purpose of having such a large sensor just for me to crop it back down to full frame or something even smaller. So while I did play around with aspect ratios a little, most of my shots from Bangkok, I framed them with the full sensor width without making use of the digital teleconverter. It wasn't until my next trip with the 100RF to the beautiful city of Shantou in China that I started to understand Fujifilm's intentions for this camera. The scapes were more vast in comparison, and I was presented with so many compositions which simply would not have worked if I did not have a tighter frame. My only options were to stop framing with the digital teleconverter. If you're willing to look past the whole not making full use of the sensor area thing, it's only when you start with such a large sensor and such a high resolution that you can afford to crop and still have a quality image. One flick of the digital teleconverter punches you in to 45mm, and your images would still be 61.5 megapixels. It's like starting with 130% and still ending up with 100% after you lose some. You continue on to 63 and 80mm, and it's still a sufficient 20 megapixel image after a whole lot of cropping. The lens has enough resolution to stand up to all this cropping, plus the digital TC would only allow you to crop in dead center anyway. The entire shooting experience on this camera is pretty much designed all around this. When you flick the view mode lever towards the grip, it cycles between a preview of the final cropped image and just a frame guide of how you're cropping. In a way, it's acknowledging all the sensor area you're wasting, but should you choose to also shoot in RAW, all that area around your frame is still retained in the RAW file. It does make the whole concept of framing a lot more fuzzy because with this much cropping power, I can hip-fire this medium format camera with not much precision at all and find my composition in post. It's enabling this rather unique shoot first and frame later approach. And that's another ironic thing about this being a medium format system, because this approach obviously only works if you've got a deep depth of field, and that's the opposite of what medium format systems are known for. Though in this case, we do have deep depth of field since we're on an f4 lens, which is also quite wide. That also makes for a pretty bokeh-less medium format experience, which alone might be a huge letdown for a lot of people who are actually seeking out that obvious large format look. You can squeeze a bit of bokeh out if you go minimum focus, which is about 20 centimeters. Not super close, but all things considered, you'll certainly be getting more bokeh out of an X100VI. So for the bokeh lovers, unfortunately, this is simply not a priority on the GFX100RF. For the same f-stop related reasons as well, this point-and-shoot medium format does get significantly more challenging to use come nightfall. It's an unstabilized 102 megapixel sensor with an f4 lens, so when it's dark enough, you'll often need both high ISO and slow shutter speeds. It's a recipe for motion blur. I found myself constantly bracing the camera against railings for stability because such a high resolution sensor is very revealing when it comes to motion blur. Admittedly, I was very conservative with my ISO because I was concerned using the crop would reveal a lot of that noise, but that led to a lot of blurry shots from shaky hands. It's the street shots, which you can't stand completely still and have to just kind of shoot as you walk by. Those I found really tough when it's not bright daylight. Maybe I've just been spoiled by IBIS, but in hindsight, I should have cranked my ISO a bit more because I'll take a noisy image over a blurry one any day. The 4-stop ND filter built into the lens, just like the X100VI, gets used a lot less often here, but I don't think that comes as a surprise. If you record video with this though, the ND is very handy, but instantly you'll be reminded again about the lack of IBIS. This is a 4K 30p camera, though there is no digital teleconverter in video mode. The aspect ratio dial also doesn't do anything in video, but this dial actually grew on me back in stills mode once I was willing to give it a shot. If the scene calls for it, it can open you up to some pretty interesting compositions, but I still think it's a bit frustrating to use because the option you're looking for is never really visible until it is the one currently selected. There's also a 3x4 option on a 4x3 sensor, so if you have that selected and now decide you want to frame horizontally, congratulations, you've just achieved cropping with extra steps. Funny enough though, cropping really just so happens to be the gist of this camera. In order to really enjoy the GFX100RF, you've really got to be okay with paying for this entire sensor and not just sometimes, but very often, use only a part of it. It is difficult to appreciate that until you travel with this and realize you can just shove a medium format camera into your bag and all it occupies is one little compartment. If you heard a meowing sound, it's from this guy. We're looking at a medium format camera with a lens for under a kilogram. And as much as I'd love to have IBIS and an f1.7 lens on here, I don't think the package that comes in would make it as my travel camera. This definitely appeals to a much smaller crowd than the legendary X100 cameras, and I don't suppose the $4,899 price tag helps with that, but I will say the GFX100RF is the closest we've gotten to a consumer's medium format camera.